talking about conditioning, how long was your typical prep, Brian?
Yeah, my typical prep was 6 months. So, 26 weeks, half a year of dieting. And I probably got up a little on the heavy side in terms of my peak off season weight. So, my typical contest weight was somewhere in the 160s, range from around 160 to 163, 164. And in the off season, I would be closer to 190, so it was 25 or so pounds over. And so it was, right around a pound a week, 25 pounds in 26 weeks. And it fell off, pretty easy early on. It was a little bit over a pound a week, probably. I never wanted to go to 2 pounds a week. I wanted to keep it somewhere between half a pound and a pound and a half per week. And for me, like I said, it was pretty consistent in terms of what I could do diet wise. I was, pretty typically my fats were around 40, 50 grams. My protein was around 200 grams. And then the carbs, I fluctuated based on what I was training. And so, like I said, my progression, I never really hit sticking points. I was pretty consistent at seeing the scale drop. And I was, I didn't use the scale a whole lot. Like some people were on the scale multiple times a day. I only weighed, maybe once or twice a week, and just kind of saw that progression over time that way. So that, it worked for me. I jumped on that long prep early on in my career and just stuck with it because the results were pretty good. When I first competed as an amateur, I think I dieted my first show. I think I dieted like 8 weeks or something like that, but that won't cut it by today's standards. So, yeah, it's almost a different era back then. Yeah.
So, you dieted 31 weeks in total in 2015, right?
That's right. That's right.
That was the additional 5 weeks was post Jordan to Worlds, right?
That's right.
Did you reverse from Jordan to Worlds, or did you just continue to diet?
Oh yeah, I continued. And I probably after the Jordan, I probably had maybe a day or two with higher calories, but then it was right back on, the low cal contest prep diet for the rest of it, for those additional 5 weeks. And, the whole reverse diet was not something we even really heard of until 2010 or so. I didn't know anything about that. And I was, I would get back into close to off-season shape just within a month or so before that time. And then I kind of learned about the importance of reverse dieting. So that was a little different. But yeah, for 2015, it was those, and I was when I won the Jordan, that was contest shape. I was in contest shape, and then it was the additional 5 weeks, maybe a little bit of extra lines and the glutes or something like that. But it's not easy to stay in contest shape for that long of a time.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think in hindsight it will be a smart idea to just steadily increase and kind of reverse into Worlds rather than continue to dieting?
Probably so. I probably could have stood to have higher calories, frankly, that whole time period. But again, I was at the cusp of accomplishing what I wanted to, and I just wanted to push as hard as I could. So I can't fault the result. I think I may have, it might have ended up with a slightly better physique if I would have bumped some carbs or whatever. I don't think I would have gone very aggressive though. Some people get really aggressive with their post-contest refeeds, and I don't think I would have done that. But probably some additional calories over that, at least those first couple weeks, would have been beneficial.
I mean, we can't argue because you did it. So, did you you touched on carb cycling, so I would assume you did some kind of refeeds.
So yeah, I mean, I don't think I called it a refeed back then, but it was basically whatever. If you were training a body part that needed more carbs, so legs, back, a massive body part where your training sessions were pretty intense, those were the higher carb days. And so, I would have upwards of 300 grams on those days. And then if you had an off day or, a day just with chest or whatever, then you're lower carbs. And so that was, I never really had an off day where I would have a refeed. My refeeds were scheduled on training days. And so I wouldn't really call it, a refeed per se, but it was just as part of my carb cycling strategy to just give my body what I thought it needed particularly on those training days. That's how I approached it.
So with 300 grams of carbs, it wasn't really like a traditional, like, let's say, maintenance level refeed, but rather like a higher low day.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
that's exactly right. Yeah. And that was,
So,
I never really went super high, maybe 350, but I certainly never had a 400 or 500 gram carb day. That was, yeah.
So those 31 weeks of dieting were pretty much dieting. So
Yeah.
you didn't really have
Yeah.
any like maintenance period in between.
No. And, looking back, I probably could have gotten away with it. And I might have benefited mentally from it. I'm pretty sure I would have. And that's probably something I would change in the future, particularly if I was going to diet for that long, is throwing in some breaks like that, even if it's just a day. Again, there's been some good research showing that it can mentally have an impact. And I think that is something I would, and it's part of it for me is I didn't want there to be one thing I could point to and say I didn't try as hard as I possibly could. And so for me, that meant dieting for, strictly for 31 weeks. But, knowing what I know now, I don't think you could point to one meal and say, oh, that's what caused him to look terrible on stage. So especially if it was like, week 17 of a diet. So I think that's something I would go back and change.
So without opening up a completely new topic, but it just came to my mind because you touched on how you could have maybe got some help with your peak weeks. Did you usually do like a traditional backload or whatever? What did you do in your seasons?
Yeah, so mostly what I would do is my last leg day would be a week prior to the contest, and I would have a high day that day. So my traditional, 300, 350 grams, taper down through about Wednesday or Thursday of that peak week. So my carbs would go from 300 to maybe 150, 100, 150 by Wednesday or Thursday, and then I would load on Friday and Saturday. So, and that would, my carbs would get higher there, again, probably not, some people are doing like 600-700 grams of carbs. I probably would have, 400, maybe even 500 on a Friday. And then again, another couple hundred a Saturday morning before you get on stage. But, that's kind of typically, that's really all I did. I didn't mess with sodium much. I didn't mess with water intake. I kept my water intake pretty high. So generally just a slow taper down and then load, a day or two before. This is really all I did.
So pretty much with the amounts you told us, pretty much like a moderate backload with the probably not the complete traditional depletion before, because you were super low, but you tapered it down after your last refeed.
That's right, and I did those old school, 1970s, 80s bodybuilder dealer, or completely taper to really trace amounts, like my first couple shows. And I just felt horrible. That was back when I was an amateur. So, you can imagine a kid not knowing what he's doing and going to, 10 or 20 grams of carbs for 2 or 3 days. And I felt absolutely horrible. And then you try to load on top of that. And so, that didn't work. And then I realized that you don't have to do that. You can just have a much more moderate taper and then a much more, not overly aggressive load, but a reasonable backload.
And what I also want to really quickly touch on is that you always kind of, you used flexible dieting, but within the restraints of having like fixed meals, right?
Yeah. So, I wouldn't say that I'm I'm okay with flexible dieting, but for me, I know what foods work for me and I use those foods. So I don't have a problem.
Macros.
Yeah. I hit my macros. That's what the bottom line is. You got to hit your macros every day. And so for the most part, I knew what sources those were going to come from, and they were from your typical bro bodybuilding foods. I did a lot of rice and chicken, a lot of oatmeal, a lot of lean ground beef, a ton of broccoli and spinach and all that kind of stuff. But it really was, I didn't go out searching for a new food that just had a certain macro profile. I kind of knew what foods I wanted to use, and really followed those for the whole diet. I can eat the same thing day after day and it doesn't bother me. And so that's really when I did most of my preps were on the same food. But I am, it's particularly in the off season and where I am now, I'm absolutely okay with eating a wider variety of foods. But if I were to go back to prep, I think I still would be. But
Hmm.
again, I like knowing what works and what my body responds to, and I have a pretty good feel for that at this point. So, I wouldn't call myself a traditional, flexible dieter because I didn't go out and eat ice cream and all this kind of stuff. I stuck with the foods that I knew worked, and again that I thought would give me the best chance of winning.
Yeah, I guess in like 2015 around, so maybe a little bit later in the Europe realms, there were like this trend of like IFYM, where you just like try to fit in whatever to hit your macros. And then in the recent years, I see people going back to more traditional like food sources, but within their macros. So they don't just have like a fixed meal plan, but rather have like macros and then plan their meals and have relatively pretty much the same from day to day. And I think that for most contest preps, for most scenarios, works pretty well, because you have the flexibility if you need it, but you have the consistency if you can use the the consistent meal to meal, day to day, but aren't like completely paralyzed if you don't have a meal at hand at one certain day or something like that. So yeah, I found it pretty funny because I just a couple days ago heard the podcast with Jeff Nippert back at his whole old branding, and I thought Brian pretty much did what we all did in the last couple of years, and before we were all into this like IFOM thing, and I think this like pushback of seeing people fitting whatever in their contest prep and even if in their off season got kind of ended, and I think that's a good thing. so yeah, you were pretty spot on, even in 2015. So let's talk about training a little bit. How did your training change when you start training with Kurt Weidner in 2004? Was it 2004? 1 year after starting to compete?
Yeah. So, I did my first contest in 2003, and Kurt wasn't there at the time, and it was a tiny little local show. I think there was like 6 total people in it, and so I won that, and I thought I knew what I was doing in terms of bodybuilding. And then Kurt comes to the gym where I was training at, and we started to train together, and that's where my definition of intensity changed. I thought I trained pretty hard and pushed myself hard on legs and that kind of stuff, but just being with someone else who has a different threshold really takes your training to the next level. And so we were doing, we would write out our workouts beforehand, and we would do like, he's a volume junkie, so we would do like 10 sets of squats and then 5 sets of leg press and then hack squats. And so we would do, these crazy workouts. And, really for the first time when I started training with him, that's when I really first started deadlifting. I hadn't deadlifted before I started training with Kurt. And so that I owe him that. We really emphasized the compound lifts, and even today he still does a lot more volume than I do, but that really kind of set me on my way in terms of getting the density that I needed to be competitive at an elite level. And so I still thank him for that. He's still a great person to look up to in that regard. He's had a great career for himself as well. And so it really was just a function of seeing what a truly intense workout it consists of, and then just nailing every detail outside of the gym as well. That was the first time he showed me his notebook with every gram of protein that he took in, and tracked his sleep and all this kind of stuff. And it was just kind of eye opening for someone who hadn't gone to that level yet.
Yeah, pretty cool. And I always find it pretty useful for yourself to train and surround yourself with people who are ahead of you, and you can just learn from. So then you continue you started working with Dr. Zourdos, and I think that was in 2013, if I'm right.
Yeah, I think that's right. I met Mike at one of Lane Norton's camps, and I think it was around, I think I might have met him in 2012 and didn't reach out until 2013. and basically just asked him to help me put together a daily undulating periodization schedule. The first time I heard anyone talk about squatting more than once a week was him, and I was like, you can't do that. How can you can't squat more than once a week? And so he put together a great program for me in 2013, and really I haven't looked back since then. I've been doing some form of DUP since I started working with him. Now, of course, when I had my surgeries and everything, I had to kind of change my way of training. The only back training I could do was pull-ups. I would crutch over to the pull-up bar and do like 10 sets of pull-ups for some back training during that time. But yeah, generally speaking, he's got me on a program where I'm squatting at least 2 times a week and maybe hack squatting another day. Deadlifting at least 2 times a week, sometimes up to 3. These sessions are, I'm kind of older now, so I'm not training 5 or 6 days a week anymore. I'm just training 4 days a week. And it's, basically we're hitting almost every body part in at least 3 of those days. And then 1 is much more, upper body focused. They're longer sessions. Some of them take me, most of them take me between 1.5 hours and 2 hours. But I feel great. I feel like, my reps range from, I don't ever go below, 3 or 4 reps, and I'm up to as high as 10 to 12. So I think I'm getting a pretty good, wide range of trying to hit that hypertrophy range. And I like training this way. I still remember training back in the old bodybuilder time where you would get the pump, and now that feels great. But I like pushing myself to heavier weights on lifts and seeing what I can do and trying to see how it affects my recovery and strength levels and all that stuff. I feel great, and I think it's been beneficial for me. I know some people will say, well, I can't do only 3 reps and then leave 2 in the tank, but I like training that way. It feels natural to me, and I'm enjoying this way of training.
So did you, when you started with Dr. Zourdos, did you stop pushing to failure all the time?
Yes, essentially yes. And before that, I had trained typical. Almost every set was literally to failure. You would do curls until you couldn't do them anymore. You would do squats until you couldn't re-rack the weight in a lot of instances. But training with Mike and using the RPE scale, most of the time I'm training, I'm going to an 8. I'm not training to a 9 or 10. Now he will push to those higher RPEs at points, but for the most part, we're training to 7s and 8s and leaving a couple reps in the tank. It's still exhausting workouts. I mean, absolutely. If you do 8 different exercises where you're only training to a 7 or 8, it's still going to be pretty exhausting. And I really enjoy that way of training. I feel like I'm getting a lot more volume in specific body parts that I need to bring up, and I think that's helpful. So, and I do talk to them about what body parts I think I need to emphasize, and he's great about offering different suggestions, and we work around things. Like right now, I've got a shoulder issue; I can't do certain movements, and so we change things up. But he's been great.
Yeah, and I think using training slightly submaximal is also the result of, you training submaximal, but also pretty effectively. It's also a result of you pushing to failure, knowing where that place is actually in training for multiple years, probably like half a decade or something like that.
Right, and I think that's a good point. Is even now as I've become stronger, it's I think I'm doing an 8, and then if I really were to push it to complete failure, I probably could get more than 2 reps. And so it's becoming a little challenging for me to figure out what actually is an 8 or a 9, particularly on some of the heavier weight that I haven't been able to lift before. So I think that's an important part of it. But you're right, knowing where your actual limit is an important part of being able to use that scale.
Yeah, agree. So do you still train with Dr. Zourdos nowadays?
I do. In fact, I just printed out his schedule for me for the week. Like cool. I said, I'm got 2 squat days. One day I'm doing hack squat. I'm deadlifting on each of the days that I do squats, and then I've got a kind of an upper body centric day. So yeah, I'm pretty. This is maybe the strongest I've been. Just a couple weeks ago, I got 4 plate squat for 9 reps, which is pretty good at my body weight. And my deadlift's probably sitting in the mid 500s, which is pretty good for me. So I feel pretty good. And I'm not obese at this point. I'm fairly lean. I don't know how lean I am, but I'm not gonna get back up to the 190, 195. That was too much. I don't really feel healthy at that weight. Right now I'm probably sitting somewhere in the 170s. So those are pretty good numbers for me at that weight.
So somewhere in the 170s, so probably like 15 pounds over stage weight, something like that.
Yeah, probably something like that. Yeah.
So pretty lean actually.
Yeah, for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I would be interested in you told us that you are training 4 days right now, but you trained for 5 and 6 days a week in the past. Do you think that especially with the 6 days on a week, do you think that was in hindsight maybe too much, or do you think that was appropriate at the time?
I think it was appropriate. That was, I was much younger then and I could recover a lot better. So when you're in your 20s and 30s, I'm okay with the higher volume. I mean, the workouts weren't as long when I was training 5 and 6 days a week. They were probably closer to an hour. So maybe the total volume might be actually the same, but I could recover pretty well. And I wasn't, training, I wasn't squatting heavy multiple times a week then and that kind of stuff. So it's a little bit different type of recovery at that point too. But I don't think I would go back and change that. I think it was appropriate at the time, and I think I recovered fine from it. I don't remember feeling completely beat up just because of the training sessions back then.
So I would assume that was the time where you actually trained like a traditional quote unquote bro split, or was that already with a high frequency?
Oh yeah, I was a bro up until like maybe 07, 08. And even when Kurt and I were training together, we would do, like I said, just tons of volume for legs, tons of volume for shoulders, and that was our day. We would just crush the body part and then go in the next day and do the same thing on a different body part. So yeah, that was and I still don't think there was a wrong way to train. I mean, it probably wasn't optimal, but we still made good gains. It's not like I can't put a percentage on how much better I would be if I would have gone back and redone all my programming, but I wouldn't go back and change that. I think it's part of the learning process. It's part of what's fun about training, is being able to train different ways. And I look back on those days and smile, because we had a lot of fun, and it was really cool to have a person you like being around and could push you hard, and those were good sessions for sure. So yeah, for me the big change was over time. As I kept with the 5 and 6 days, I did start to feel beat up. And so, especially as you diet down. And so there came a point where I was like, okay, I need to cut it back to just 4 days a week, 5 days a week. And that just comes with experience and feeling, what you're knowing when your body's saying this is too much, especially as you're doing more cardio and less food. That's when you start to really feel beat up.
So when you then switch to higher frequency for body parts per week, did you then also reduced training days per week?
Yes. Yeah. When I started training with Mike is when I really did that. I think we might have started out with 5 days a week, and now we're down to 4.
Okay.
And like I said, when you're training, 2 hours a day, you can get, that does tax your recovery system a little bit. But when you have those multiple days off in between, it helps. And so that's, we kind of made that call together, and he's been great with that too.
And one final question for training. Did you got better results from not pushing to failure and having a high frequency?
I think so. I think you could look back at the gains that I made. I'm really proud of the gains I made between, like I said, 07 and 10, at which point I wasn't doing DUP. And I think that just came with, like I said, some of the front squats. I probably did squat more than once a week at that point. But since DUP, I think I've made really good just general physique gains as well as strength gains in the body parts that I really want to try to emphasize, which are legs, back, and biceps. Frankly, those are the ones that I think I hold my own on and really kind of are the main points of my physique. And so I'm trying to emphasize those while bringing other ones up. And I think DUP really does allow you to do that. So like I said, I don't think I'm going to change this way of training. I feel good about it. I hope I can continue to train this way into my 70s. So we'll see. I don't think I'll be on a competitive stage at that point, but I like the way this training makes me feel, and I think it's it's sustainable, which I think is important.
Absolutely. So, Brian, I have one last question for you, which is kind of broad. But you, before we started podcast, we talked offhand or off air that you may just want to touch on why you don't have a social media. So do you want to include that, or should we just go with the last question?
Sure. Yeah, I can touch on that.
I had a question about this actually, but I was just saving it for the end in case we are just time restrained. So I would be just interested in why do you hide yourself, kind of, and because you documented your whole journey so detailed on your website. Why did you decide to not use social media for more general or like output, like public output?
Yeah, so there's a couple reasons for that. So first answer is I'm a pretty private person. I don't like anytime I post anything, I don't even really I've never posted anything on Instagram, so that's one thing. But even anytime I post anything on Facebook, it comes across as bragging to me, and I hate bragging. So I feel like even if I just post a video of a squat or something like that, I feel like it's bragging, and I don't like that. So you mentioned my website. So everything I've done on my website is after the fact. So these are things I've already accomplished, and I can actually say, okay, here's what I did. One thing I hate about social media is, like, look at me now. This is what I'm going to do. And nobody can say what they're going to do. There's, all kinds of things that could happen between now and then. And I don't particularly care for that. I'm more about letting your record speak for itself. And so that's why I kind of like the old school website where you can read about a person's approach. Now, I know a lot of people love following people on Instagram, and it can be a great tool, and it is a great tool, particularly for people whose business, relies on interaction and getting word out about themselves. But I'm not, I don't do bodybuilding to make money. This is not my business. I'm not a contest prep coach. And so I don't really like, putting myself out there and letting other people kind of aim for me on social media. I prefer to keep as you kind of said, keep behind the scenes, just put the work in, and then let the results speak for themselves. So while I know, unfortunately, it kind of seems like in today's day and age, people kind of think of bodybuilding is the same as Instagram. Like, you see people on Instagram, that's kind of today's bodybuilding, is just what you look like on Instagram. And that's not true for me. I like to look at, I prefer contest results and what you actually look like on stage. And so I kind of like to let those things speak for themselves. So, it's a combination of, I'm a relatively private person. It's hard work to keep up a solid social media presence. I frankly don't have time to post a lot of content on all these different things if I want to be good at my job and spend time with my kids and that kind of stuff. And it's just, as an economist, it's just the costs outweigh the benefits for me. There's a lot of, again, like I said, time commitment, and I don't get, compensation for it. Whereas the benefits to me are not as tangible. I appreciate that some people would like to see that from me, and they realize I've had an okay history in bodybuilding and maybe would benefit from some content from me. But I just don't. I don't see the benefits as outweighing the cost for me personally. So take that as you will.
I think that's a great answer. And what I also really like is your mentality when it comes to showing or looking at yourself in training, because I and a lot of other people came to the conclusion that hiding yourself kind of a little bit in the gym environment actually gives you more focus, I would say, in the training session itself. And as a physique competitor, obviously the physique is very important, but there is time when you are actually assessing your physique and evaluating it, and that doesn't necessarily have to be in training. So when I prepped, I pretty much, I from time to time looked at myself in the training sessions, but it was mostly how do my pictures, like my progress pictures, look, and what do I have to change or not. So
absolutely, I think I made that point on my website, is that there's a time and
yeah.
place for posing practice, and you absolutely have to evaluate your physique, and it's great to get other people to evaluate your physique, but it's not during the middle of your training session. You don't stop, in between sets of squats and look at your legs. You do that when you're fully evaluating your physique. You don't want to. I stay completely covered up when I train. I don't like to show off, and I think it does when you do stay covered up like that. It kind of gives you a different perspective on the gym in general. I agree. It makes you more focused on your training sessions, and it to me it helps drive you. So that's just my opinion.
Good point. So final question, Brian. I would be interested in, is there anything yet that you would do differently retrospectively? And ultimately with this like super successful competitive history in natural bodybuilding, what is natural bodybuilding ultimately for you?
Good questions. So I think the thing that I would change, I kind of alluded to this in the past. I probably could have used more help with peaking throughout my career. I didn't have any help with peaking for, from 05 through maybe 2010, 2012. And I could certainly have used that help. I did have people evaluating my pictures as I dieted down into shape, into contest shape, but I didn't have a whole lot of help with the actual, last couple weeks of prep. I think I could have benefited from that. I could have learned a little bit more about the actual science that went into that, and learn from someone who has a lot of experience with other competitors. So that's probably the main thing I probably would go back and change. I don't think I would change all the different ways that I've trained over the years. I don't think I would change my basic diet approach. I've tried all the different cardio methods from HIIT to steady state, and I don't think I would go back. I think I learned a lot from all those. So the peaking is probably the only thing I would change. Even after my surgeries, I don't think I would change the way I trained. That's not something that I could have prevented from the way I trained. That was just a genetic thing where I was born bow-legged. So I don't think that impacted my eventual outcome there. And to me, I've kind of always said this about natural bodybuilding. It's a way to challenge yourself. I've never found anything in this life that challenges me as fully as going through a contest prep. I've here in academia, I've pushed myself hard. We've got pretty high dollar amount grants that we have to, do these final products for. I've got students underneath me that are counting on me to help guide them along the PhD process and all this kind of stuff. But going through a full 26-week prep where you're manipulating every gram of the diet along the way, you're manipulating your training along the way, you're mentally trying to handle the competing side of your life with the other aspects of your life, you're juggling all these things. It's such a challenge that I think you can really benefit all aspects of your life. And that's why I love it. And I will continue to live this lifestyle as long as I'm here, is that it really puts things in perspective. It shows you what you can be and really kind of tells you what you're made of, because there's going to be challenges along the way. And that's why I love it. And I'm proud that I've been able to be pretty successful while still having a pretty productive both professional life and real world life with my family. So I'm really proud of that. And I think natural bodybuilding has been a big contributing factor to that. I don't think I would be as successful in my day job if it wasn't for natural bodybuilding. I think it helps me consider everything that goes into what it takes to be productive, and really make that juggle those components to get the best outcome.
I think that's a great answer, and I think that's a great end. So, Brian, it's been a pleasure. Super thankful for your time. Is there anything, or do you? I would like you to just tell people where they can find you, and where they can read probably more about you, stuff like that. So.
Sure. So as we mentioned, I think I do have an Instagram account, but there's 0 posts. So don't go there looking for content. I
But
do
you
have
have
a
over
Facebook
1K.
account.
You have over
Yeah.
1K followers.
Yeah, I think I might be the only person with over 1,000 followers with 0 posts. I do have a Facebook account, but I honestly don't know how many unanswered friend requests I have. Probably in the thousands as well. So I only post like maybe once every couple of months. So you can try to find me on Facebook too. But the best way to go to actually get in touch with me, and I do try to answer emails that come in there, is just my website. It's just brianwhitacre.net. There is an email on there that you can send emails to, and I do try to reply to those as much as I can. So yeah, that's the best way to get in touch with me is via email on my website. Like I said, I have a Facebook account that I try to update, but I can't promise I'll answer friend requests on that one. So I do apologize for being somewhat of a shadow, but that's just kind of the way I like to live my life. So thanks, Jan, for having me on. Get me out of my shadow a little bit. I appreciate it.
I don't think you actually have to excuse yourself. I mean, that's just your decision. And I mean, the website is super great. It looks like a website from 2010 or 2005 or something like that.
I think it is.
But it's super informative. Like you pretty much detailed all your seasons, all your pro seasons there. And I think for someone into natural bodybuilding, it's a must read. And really, it also read itself really good. I really enjoyed reading those. I pretty much read the whole website before doing this to prepare myself, and I can absolutely recommend it.
Great, thanks, man.
Cool. So, thanks again, and have a good day.
Okay. Thanks, Jan. Appreciate all you guys listening.